Thank you guys for joining. Emily Coleman is with us. She's the superintendent at the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Officially, they got a fancy title that we don't have. She's also a mom of a blind kid, and also she co-authored this Bill of Rights that she's going to be presenting today. And she gets a fancy introduction in part to encourage all of you. When we put together this Tuesday tea idea, it was to facilitate discussions, and I think you all saw the change of the name to Tuesday Tea hosted by CSB. Our hope is that TVIs and teachers and people in our field will feel empowered to reach out to me and propose a topic for discussion, and that this will be an open ground for everybody in our state to connect. And I thought this one was even worth having someone from Texas come in and talk on, because it's some pretty important stuff. So thank you, Emily, for staying late and joining us. And we got a wonderful crew of people here from California, and we got a few wonderful people from outside of California. Oh, I'm getting reminded here. If you guys remember, we're on a long haul mission to increase our outreach, and so we're collecting some statistics. So if you could change your name to reflect where you're from, a school district and or state, and your position. If you're a TVI, an O&M, school psych, whatever it is, if you could do that, that would help us in our long-term mission of getting more funding. Without further ado, Emily Coleman, welcome.
Thank you. That's a creative way to get data, by having everyone change their names on there.
We looked at other ways to do it, and this was the most passive.
Well, whatever makes our lives easier these days, I'm sure is worth it. Well, I am going to try to share my screen here and pull up a presentation. We'll see if it works. Look at that. Mostly it's just words, so it's not that exciting of a PowerPoint. But I'll talk a little bit about myself briefly. Adrienne already gave you some background information, but I am the mom of 3 kids, and my middle child was born with optic nerve hypoplasia in 2005. And so in 2010, I went back to school to the Portland State program to become a TVI. And one of the reasons was, as you all know, that our kids are fairly complicated, and I wasn't equipped to provide him with what I felt like I needed. So went back to school to become a TVI. And I worked as an itinerant for a few years, and then with the Washington State School for the Blind, and then became their outreach director. And then in 2018, moved to Texas to become the outreach director at TSBVI. And then in 2019, became the superintendent here. And after I moved to Texas from 2018 to 2020, I was the president of AER, and was approached by Paul Olson with the Council of Schools and Services for the Blind. And he's the superintendent in North Dakota. And Paul had come up with this idea of a Bill of Rights for all children with visual impairment and their families. And so Paul reached out to me and to Janie Blom, who was the executive director of AER at the time, and asked if we'd be interested in drafting this up with him. So I'm going to kind of walk you through it today and ask you some questions, and hopefully get some feedback from you. So there's a preamble on this document, and it says, what it says is that in addition to numerous educational principles that have been proven to be beneficial for children with visual impairment, all the provisions of what constitutes a free and appropriate public education under the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 1990 shall be assumed along with this Bill of Rights. So if we have this preamble that's saying that we already have state and federal laws to support children and students like ours, do any of you have any ideas about why maybe we would need to create a document that specified that further? Does anyone feel brave enough to unmute themselves and and say why we might need something in addition to what is already state and federal law. Let's see if we have any takers.
Maybe to specify for the needs of our low incidence population, it's not a very known area of specialty. So I think it's really helpful for, like Summer put in the chat, for families and school administrators or program administrators to better understand what our students and their families are entitled to.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. And I think we all know that our students are pretty unique. And any of us that have worked in this field have spent a lot of time explaining why they are different than other possible students with disabilities in education. And so we felt like this would give families a tool to help them advocate for their children, whether it's in an IEP meeting, in a classroom, or really in any setting. And this is pretty technical. And when I first presented it to families, they said, one group that I worked with, and I think Adrian was there when I was presenting, and they're like, why is it so wordy, and it's so technical, and it's all this jargon. And the reason for that is that we wanted to give them a tool that they could take to an administrator, and it speaks their language, like it speaks the language of special education, and therefore it holds a little more weight. And also an administrator could look at it and say, oh, so when you're talking about evaluation, this is what you mean for this group of kids. So that was where we sort of came from when we came up with this. So let's go through some of these. So the first right says, children with all levels of visual impairment, including those with multiple disabilities and those who are deaf-blind, have a right to early intervention and instruction provided by highly trained and qualified teachers of students with visual impairment and certified orientation and mobility specialists that is timely, ambitious, and results in the highest possible achievement of each child. So what do any words in this right stand out to any of you? Any pieces of this that really stand out? And you can put it in the chat or you can say it out loud, either way. Ambitious. Yeah, specific, who is providing the intervention and the instruction. Highly trained and qualified. So do any of you have any ideas about why we added in including those with multiple disabilities and who are deaf-blind? Why do you think we need to say that?
This is Julie. I think I hear very much too often in school districts in my state, but vision is the least of their problems, or vision is their strength. So it's not, they want to discount the need for that instruction.
Yeah, that's a great point, Julie. That's one of the reasons that we added it in there, is to emphasize, oftentimes I've sat in a lot of IEPs for other students and for my own child, and was told that certain things didn't apply because they're autistic, they're developmentally delayed, or for whatever reason. And so I think it's important that we always say, like, all kids with visual impairment, regardless of what else might be going on. Yeah, here's another comment that Summer put in there about as a comms with early intervention, and that children under 3 who are VI have not gotten any intervention at all when coming into school districts. Yeah, and so that too happens a lot with our kids with multiple disabilities in early intervention, is that they're being seen for all these other things, and vision is overlooked or missed because there's so many other things happening for that child or that family. So on each of these rights that I'm going to share, I'm going to provide a quick, what I call a one-sentence shot of my takeaway of what it is. This document is on AER's website, and you can find it there. But I also wrote an article for Family Connect that summarized it from sort of a parent point of view, so that you have this lengthy right that's written out in this way that is very technical. And so as a parent, I've summarized each of them in my own words. And so for me, this right means my child deserves easy access to the right professionals expecting his success. So as we go through these, I'm going to show you sort of for each of them how I summarize it for myself as a parent. All right, so number 2. Children with visual impairment have the right to a functional vision evaluation and a learning media assessment by highly trained and qualified teachers of students with visual impairment to determine appropriate services following the initial clinical eye exam. So what students do you think most often go without an educational evaluation following an eye exam? Which students do you think we're missing the most? Ooh, CVI? Yeah, I think we miss CVI kids a lot, right? They might get an eye exam, but they have other diagnoses, and so the vision professional isn't brought in. Yep, that would include some of our students with multiple disabilities. Low vision comes to mind for me. That's one too. I think those kids often might get an eye exam and maybe they get put on a 504, but nobody ever really does a full evaluation to determine what else they might need. So for me, I just said my child deserves an education based on his specific needs. So, you know, it's kind of like saying, yeah, my son Eddie has optic nerve hypoplasia. How many kids with ONH have you met that present their vision presents the same way, and that you could walk into a classroom and say, oh, you have ONH, this is what you need? Like, it just doesn't exist. He needs more information from his team to get what he needs at school. Okay, so this one's obviously about evaluation that's specific to vision. All right, number 3. Parents and guardians of children with visual impairment have the right to assistance in interpreting the educational implications of the diagnosed visual impairment that is provided by highly trained and qualified teachers of students with visual impairment and certified mobility specialists, and the right to seek assistance from regional and national agencies, including consumer advocacy organizations, that can help them make informed decisions on behalf of their child. So this one, you know, I want to point out again that we have highly trained and qualified, I think 3 in a row. We keep emphasizing that throughout this document, right? It can't just be anybody. But this really gets into, like, parents have a right for somebody to explain to them what's going on and to seek out resources to help them. When do you think most parents really get an explanation of either the functional vision eval or the learning media assessment? When does that happen for most of our families? At the IEP meetings? Any other time? At an eligibility meeting? Do you think it should always happen in those meetings? Like, do you think that's a oh, sometimes at a low vision clinic? Do you think that it's a good space to get that information for a family? Is in those IEP meetings with all the professionals at the table? Someone said after the evaluation, maybe. So I can say, yeah, IEPs are definitely overwhelming. Oh no, Summer had a high schooler that was evaluated by a school psych. It wasn't on her caseload. Yeah, so I think that this is an area where we should all be working on this. And as a TVI, I failed at this entirely. But I think parents should really get this information in detail outside of an IEP, maybe before the meeting. I have sat through 4 5-hour IEP meetings, and by the time I get to an hour in, I'm already done, and it's just really overwhelming. So I think this is something that we could all probably work on. Do you think it's important to connect families to other organizations, like outside of the school, other entities that are related to vision? Yes. Resources and options? Yes, absolutely. Is there a risk to connecting families to other organizations aside from us being the only one they get their information from? Resources.
Depends on what county in California they're from.
It depends on what county. Is
What
that
county? It depends on whether they've been threatened that they'll be fired or not.
Oh,
We
okay.
have a couple of those. We have a couple of those.
Interesting. Yeah, there is a risk. I think there can be a risk. Financial liability for districts. Yeah. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because we have our favorites and we have people that we've connected with professionally and maybe even personally that we get excited about sharing with families. But we have a committee here at our school that's working on diversity and inclusion and equity for students and staff. And we were talking yesterday about how we should partner with our students' community, whoever the community is for our student, we should partner with them when helping them plan for their futures and what they need. And it was brought up that sometimes we're biased in who we include in conversations regarding our students. And so I think there can be a risk with connecting families with organizations that we may not totally align with. But I also think it's important to share as many resources as that may be helpful and to include people that they want at that table. So, but it can definitely be tricky.
I think a lot of TVIs get nervous, Emily, about their own knowledge base and their own comfort with going outside of their box because they're nervous that they don't have enough knowledge themselves, and they're nervous they don't know the answers, and if somebody else comes along and recommends something or says something, it'll point out a fatal flaw that they have as a TVI. And I know from our outreach division, we're constantly trying to establish a partnership rather than a "we know better, you should do it this way" type approach. And I think the same is probably true from Braille Institute and Lighthouse for the Blind and throughout the country, other agencies. But it can be intimidating to go outside of your own box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I know that when I was especially a new TVI, I didn't know a lot. I didn't have a lot of people that I was connected to. And so literally anybody with a bit more experience than me could have walked into any of those IEP meetings and been like, she doesn't, what is she saying? And that is intimidating for sure, but I think that it's okay to admit when we don't know or when there's something new. I've only officially been in this field for 10 years, and I don't know much. There's a lot I don't know. And so at least a couple times a week, I'm saying, oh, I didn't know that, or I'm sorry, I shared misinformation. And so, talking about a growth mindset, having mentors is really important. Yeah. So these are all things that can be very helpful. All right, so for my parent summary of this one, I just said that I deserve accurate information to make the best choices for my son and access to professionals and organizations that can help. So that was just my quick summary of this long right. All right, number 4, See, I told you they were kind of wordy. That's why we had to provide a Cliff Notes version. So, as required by IDEA, in the case of a child who is blind or visually impaired, the IEP team must provide for instruction in Braille and the use of Braille unless the team determines, after an evaluation of the child's reading and writing skills needs and appropriate reading and writing media, including an evaluation of the child's future needs for instruction in Braille or the use of Braille, that instruction in Braille or the use of Braille is not appropriate for the child. Appropriate reading and writing media are determined by conducting a learning media assessment. That's a lot of words, right? So why do you think it's important to call out Braille specifically? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think that too many of our students who need Braille are not given access regularly enough to their materials.
Mm-hmm.
And many administrators think that technology is the cure-all and that hard copy Braille is a thing of the past.
Marty wrote in here that teachers and districts are uncomfortable with Braille. Sarah shared it is time and cost intensive. We all know that's true.
Yeah.
So the other important thing to mention about Braille is that it's the law. It's actually in the law. And so, you know, like my child uses a lot of different media. He's a tactile symbol user. He prefers auditory stories. But Braille is called out in the law. And when he was younger, I had a conversation with a mentor. As Marty mentioned earlier, having mentors is important. And I said, now I know that this was when we were in Washington, and I said, our state law says that every child should have Braille. But does that mean my son who's autistic, my son who's developmentally delayed, can I go to his school and advocate that he gets Braille, or does this not mean him because he's not grade level? And so I think that, you know, as Julie said, a lot of our kids Braille isn't even considered because they might have multiple disabilities or other reasons for them not being able to access Braille. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be considered. And there's lots of assessment tools out there to make those decisions. But, you know, we added this in because we want it to be something that's at least discussed for every student. And there's a couple more notes in the chat. Yeah. Still, Marty says it's still the case. Karen talks about schools don't send materials on a regular basis. And then they give kids stuff they can't really see very well. I still feel so bad. We have kids here at our school that are reading stuff right up on their face all the time. And I can't help but wonder, you know, I don't always know all the specifics, but I wonder if it's because they maybe did have deteriorating vision over time and they never made the switch, or they haven't yet made the switch.
We instituted a rule at the California School for the Blind that before COVID that you can't wipe eyeball grease on the monitors. It's a hard and fast rule.
Pretty good one.
It's really fun when they're touching buttons on their iPad.
That's pretty bad. Yeah. Yeah. Adrian says he loves ruling out Braille for a print or auditory reader if it really forces the issue of understanding the specific supports they need. Yeah, so it works both ways, right? That's what you're saying there.
Whole nother conversation about how our low vision kids are getting shortchanged, right? And you started that with the first slide of this is all inclusive. This is regardless of your disability, and our low vision kids get shortchanged often with the specifics of what they need.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I have a set of twins that we're working with that are slowly losing their vision, and the TBI decided that since they still have vision, that it's more important for them to learn printed reading than it is to read Braille. And their parent has had to fight every year to get their materials in Braille. And then I have another student, I was just talking to the mom, and he also has ONH, and they're not getting the brailled material to him on time, and they're sending home printed material to him, and he's blind. And she said they want him to do these worksheets that don't even fit for him. So, you know, it's still a struggle for our families, a big struggle. And, you know, I often wonder why we have to put parents through this.
Well, it's, you know, it's one of the reasons that this document was created to help them. But yeah, the material issue, don't you worry, that's another right that's going to be coming up too. So this was, you know, this was an easy summary for me. I just said my child with visual impairment deserves Braille instruction. Like that's just that's how I summarize this one as a parent. All right, so number 5. Children and families have the right to be fully informed about the expanded core curriculum of skills unique to students with visual impairment, which includes, and then we list them here, compensatory skills, O&M, social interaction, independent living, recreation and leisure, career education, assistive technology, sensory efficiency, and self-determination. So how many families do you think know the term expanded core curriculum? I mean, I don't know what it's like in California, if it's something that all families know, or what do you typically find if you bring this up? Adrian's shaking his head. Marty says a few families know in South Carolina.
Yeah, a few of my families know, like half, maybe.
Yeah. Julie says not near enough. Yeah. What about professionals? Do you feel like TVIs know this term fairly well? Do you think that it's pretty broad knowledge? I'm seeing a no. Some don't.
I think many do, but I think depending on your situation, to cover all of these is difficult. So in my experience, people focus on 2 or 3 that they're very good at, or they think that they can do in their specific situation. I'm in a situation where I can work on the majority of these, but not everybody is. So, you know, you're going to do what you're comfortable with, because you have knowledge and you maybe have materials that you can provide.
Yeah, I've certainly seen some bias in this with teachers leaning towards those areas of the ECC that they're more comfortable with, especially with specific students. Why do you think it's important for families to be fully aware of what the ECC is? Oh, it can be worked on at home. True.
I think too that to understand that vision services is not just Braille instruction or cane use, that there's all these other areas that our kids need specific instruction in if they're going to be successful independent adults.
And that also, you know, one thing about the ECC is that I think that some parents understand that we're going to work on these things, but that they are not necessarily working on them at home, which is a frustration I'm finding now with Zoom, is that things that I worked on with students, like independent living skills, for example, are not being done at home, and now you see it, and now you know why you have trouble reinforcing something that you feel you work on several times a week. It's not being followed at home just because they don't understand it or don't know how to do it, I think.
This is Sarah. I think that if you start an early intervention with that whole parent coaching model, and you really team with parents, you can't teach the expanded core curriculum isolated in a classroom, just a TVI and a student. It has to incorporate you know, the classroom teacher, the other service providers, the parent, the family members, in order for those skills that you're directly teaching to be a part of their everyday life. So if your families don't know about expanded core curriculum, your student's not going to get very far.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think has been really helpful in sharing about the ECC with families for that reason and more is that it helps explain how much our children really need. And so when you walk through these 9 areas with a family and you explain how kids with vision loss miss out on rec and leisure, how they miss out on social interaction, why independent living needs to be explicitly taught, like it really helps sort of cement that idea that there's more to our students that really needs to be addressed, and then that way they can help explain it to other, you know, members of the family, teachers, clubs, wherever their kids are, their churches, their communities, and then you have the champion built into the parent. And like Sarah said, coaching young is great. I mean, if we could get that for all of our families, I mean, think of the partner we'd have in education moving forward if we could help really explain that early. So my Cliff Notes version is that I deserve to know about the unique skills needed for my son who is blind. So, you know, basically that's really all it is that if you don't tell me the unique skills that he needs to be taught, I'm probably not going to know, you know, I mean, not as early as I should know.
You know, on this note, I saw Rebecca put in the chat a lot of the ECC would benefit all students, even those who aren't VI. I've spent the last 5 years trying to explain the ECC to administrators around our state. And only in the last 6 months or so, I found this magic bullet to talk to administrators, especially in front of parents. And it's to relate the expanded core curriculum to whole child education. And the moment I bring up whole child education, no administrator poo-poos that or has any negative comment to say about that, especially in front of a parent. And certainly in California, we're struggle with whole child education dramatically. But the ECC encompasses that principle and that concept of we're going to support this kid throughout. And it's a neat, it creates a dialogue in this intersection point with administrators where they start to, okay, I get it. Like this kid can't be taught in completion without a TVI on the team.
Mm-hmm. Boy, isn't it helpful when you can integrate some of our fancy vernacular with what people are hearing in education?
I think it's fancy that you just said vernacular, but
I'll make myself a note, a bonus point today for using a big word. But I mean, I've said that a lot, like I think we're pretty siloed in blindness education. And so finding ways to intersect our vocabulary or vernacular with the rest of education is only going to help our students and help us advocate for what they need. It's a great point. All right, number 6 also has to do with the ECC, and it talks about how children have a right to assessment and instruction in school and in their communities in every area of the ECC that is deemed appropriate by the team and includes the parents or guardians as the primary decision makers and includes the student when appropriate. And then the last sentence says the ECC is equal in importance to the standard academic curriculum and will not be overlooked in the educational plan. So do you agree with that statement? Do you think it's equal to the core curriculum? Or do you have a different opinion on that? Marty agrees. Summer said glad communities is included. Well, Summer, Paul is an O&M, and so that is why communities was added into that, because that was his perspective as well. Julie agrees. Yeah. So, and we had talked a little bit about assessment and how does every area apply to every student who is blind or VI, and I think, you know, that's why we talk about assessment being important, because every area may not apply, but I feel like it should be considered. and then family should be included in what is targeted. And as we said, you know, someone said earlier, there's just not time in a school day sometimes to teach to every area of the ECC. And so sometimes we have to prioritize, but in those moments, I think it's really important to include families as well and the student when appropriate. You know, when my son was like 5 or 6 years old, I went to a conference and they were talking about the ECC and how they were so shocked that parents didn't rank career education as very high, as far as they had parents rank the ECC and determine what was the most important to them. And they said, you know, career education came in last every time. And as a parent, I have a 5-year-old who I was focusing on potty training. I was like, career ed is the last thing in my mind. But what I didn't realize as a parent of a young child is that, you know, having a child that's potty trained will highly benefit them by getting a job as an adult in any way. And so, you know, I think that in my mind, career education was the bottom of the list because of all these other things he had to accomplish. And so at that point in his life, that isn't what I would have wanted to focus our attention on. But of course that changes over time, and having people explain to me, you know, that they really are all interacting and they can help each other out. But I just think it's really important that families are included in the process of deciding which areas should really be focused on. And Summer put, yeah, going through the ECC screening with parents is helpful. Yeah, not only to identify what to work on, but also to help them see what all may need to be worked on moving forward. So, my quick one of this was that my child deserves additional blindness-specific instruction outside of standard coursework. So that was sort of my quick summary of that one. Marty said his mentor taught him that we must be able to see these kids at 25 in order to be able to teach them at any age. Boy, isn't that true. We're going to talk about that too, Marty. I think that's number 9. All right, number 7. So this is the one about materials. Children have the right to receive school materials that are accessible in the preferred format and at the same time as their sighted peers. Children have an absolute right to testing procedures and instruments that are fair and accessible, that take into consideration the results of the FVE and include all accommodations identified in the IEP. Does anyone want to say why it's important that maybe the functional vision eval happens first when a child is being evaluated?
If the site goes to test them and they're a large print reader, then their test is nullified if the VI hasn't discerned what size print, or if they're should be a Braille user. So it kind of nullifies everything if they're using print testing and the student can't read it. They're going to score a lot lower than.
Summer said so that team members can make their assessments accessible, which is what you're saying as well. How many times have you all seen students be tested before the functional vision was done? Has everybody seen that happen? Yeah. All the time. Yes. Yeah. It always surprised me when I was working as an itinerant, and I don't know why, but it was like, why doesn't it just make sense that you might want to wait for that important piece of information about, you know, you're going to have a child do a reading comprehension exam and you don't know what size font is appropriate. It's kind of crazy. Adrian?
Maybe it's a bigger statement to the stress in working at schools that after that FVA comes out and all those specialists realize that their assessment maybe wasn't valid, that they're not knocking on the door to go do it again. That oftentimes we get that presentation of, false data anyway. Like we don't know how to trust it. And we are rarely insisting that assessments be completed again or redone with good, valid print size or information on their learning medium.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think I ever had anyone say they would retest.
Mm-mm.
That's depressing. So obviously, yeah. And so everyone's sharing in the chat very similar experiences. So looking back at the school materials, does anything stand out about the first sentence here in the preferred format and at the same time? How many times do we see our students don't get it at the same time as their classmates? It's pretty common, unfortunately. A lot of teachers that are sort of doing some last minute planning and prep, which I get. I mean, we've all done it, but usually they just sort of, our students might get left out if the TBI is not there yet or the materials aren't ready. Yeah. Yeah. All the time. We're getting a lot of that. Yeah. Even worse with online learning. I could see that. All right, so my summary of this one was that my child deserves all the same information as his peers in whatever way he needs it. So for him, if his peers are getting a novel and he needs a 3-sentence synopsis in tactile symbols, he should get that. So otherwise, don't make him sit through the lesson, unless it's a way that he can perceive the information. Yeah. Or Summer says, don't tell me they don't need anything and I find out afterwards that they do. Yeah. Yep. Or we'll get it to them next week and then they're behind. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that this is one that it's important for parents to see too, because they often feel bad. Like, oh, I don't need to bother you, but you sent this home and he can't access it, and should that be on the parents really to say, like, you sent home the wrong materials, or my child can't independently use this work? Yeah. Or you can just read it to him, as Julie said. Yeah, it shouldn't be on the parents. So by giving them this right too, it's saying, hey, parents, this is the school's responsibility. This is a right your child has. So I think it's important that they know that. Oh yeah, or we won't have a textbook and then they do. Yeah. All right. Okay, number 8. So this is sort of an interesting one. It says, it's the right of children and families for a full range of educational placement settings to be discussed at IEP meetings, including the variety of unique programs and options offered in specialized schools and services for children who are visually impaired. A specialized school may offer the best opportunity for achievement and be the least restrictive environment for some children. So this one is sort of interesting because one of our co-authors, Paul, lives in a state where there isn't a school for the blind, but he strongly advocated that this was important, that families are told about all options for their child. How many times have we gone into meetings and the placement has been presented, like, and this is where your child is going to be? Like all the time, right? I mean, usually it's a decision that's made by the team without the parents present. I can't think very often about, I was told about a menu of options. It was more like, this is the placement for your child that we have at this school. This is where they're going to go. So as a TBI, I also didn't always share. I've always lived in a school with a state with a school for the blind, and I haven't always shared that as an option. So what do you think the risk is of sharing all the placement options, even if you think they might not be a good fit? Because I think there is some risk. Any ideas? Can be overwhelming. Yeah. Parents often have their child identified as blind, may not be an appropriate fit. So from a parent perspective, I can share with you that it has been a rare time in my son's educational career that I have felt like there was a place just for him. And when he was, before we moved to Texas, we were in Washington State, and that particular school for the blind didn't have a program for him. And so I would get in some debates with the principal, who's a good friend of mine, and he would say, you know, every family should be told about the School for the Blind. And I said, but if you raise their hopes and then their child is inappropriate, for me as a parent, if someone had said to me like, oh, there's this place, it's a School for the Blind, they have resources for blind kids, and all the teachers know how to work with kids who are blind, my hopes would have been like through the roof. Like, we're moving, we're loading up, because I had never had him in a school that was a fit for him in that kind of a way. But knowing that School for the Blind didn't have a program specifically for him would have really dashed our kind of hopes and dreams a little bit. And so when I was a TVI, I was always worried about raising families' expectations or putting a carrot out there that might not actually be something they can have. And so that's where my own bias came in before I brought those conversations to the table. And I don't know if that was right or wrong, but it was one of the reasons that I didn't always tell families about all the placement options. So May wrote in here, instructions by legal teams to provide one offer of FAPE. Yeah. Or consideration in South Carolina. Yeah. So it's tricky. It's tricky. Yeah. Oh yeah, districts feeling that they're admitting they can't do it if they send a kid to the School for the Blind. Yeah, I've seen that in every state that I've worked in.
We just actually got it added into the administrative code in New Mexico for students with visual impairments or deaf, hard of hearing, that parents have to at least be informed that there are special schools in our state at each IEP, and that's brand new.
In California, we have that written into parents' rights. But a whole nother question, when was the last time you saw a parent read through their parent rights? So while the text is in there about the School for the Blind and Deaf, parents, you know, typically don't even take them. No, we don't need another copy. We don't take the time to explain it. We don't do a good enough job advertising what the School for the Blind does in California either. We try to get it out there, but does everyone know what we offer, what type of student is a fit at our school?
Yeah. Oh, a parent, she shared that we'd rather the district say they can't accommodate versus having a child that's regressed. Now they're listening. You have an attorney. Yeah, I think that's, you know, I'm the same way. Like, I wish that there wasn't so much, I mean, I know why there's legal ramifications in special ed and you know, and why they're there, but it's also made districts afraid to be honest. And that is tough as a parent. Yeah, parents need to have a voice and a choice, tools to make informed decisions. Yeah. And, you know, even if the School for the Blind, for example, was the best placement, a parent might not choose that for a variety of reasons. But even not thinking about a blind school, but thinking about within a district, and when parents, you know, there's options between like what's sometimes called the life skills classroom versus integrated into gen ed, or like even just that level of choices, I think families should be included in that as well. So my summary of this was that I deserve to know about all school settings to have a voice in the placement decision. So pretty straightforward. All right, I'm running low on time. I got 2 more. Okay, number 9. All children with a visual impairment have the right to teams that enthusiastically assist them in preparing for transition to independence and adulthood. So why do you think we added the term enthusiastically? Any ideas? Anyone like that? Summer likes it. Marty does. Yeah. When doesn't it happen? When don't we enthusiastically assist to prepare for adulthood?
After a 9 days off, you know, between fall break and winter break, just saying.
You're not wrong. Yeah. You know, I think personally, I don't enthusiastically assist when I don't really know where we're headed. Like when I can't picture it. When I have a student that's really hard, you know, with my own son, like I don't have any idea what adulthood is going to look like for him. And because of that, there are days when I totally enable him and don't make him do anything, because I'm just like, oh God, you're just going to live with me forever. This is just my lot in life, you know? And I think as educators, we get into the same kind of funk sometimes, where we're just not really sure where we're headed. And so it's important to remember that it's our job to like always be thinking ahead. And like Marty said earlier, picture your student at 25 so that you can help them get to that point. Yeah, like Summer said, many people don't know what's possible for our students. Yeah. So for my quick summary, I just said my child deserves educators that will prepare him for the future. You know, I don't want him to have people that are just checking their box that they are meeting his minutes, but that they're actively preparing him for whatever's going to come next. Enthusiastically, hopefully, except for between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Then the bar might be lower. All right, number 10. Children with visual impairment, including those with multiple disabilities and deaf blindness, have the right to be perceived and treated as equal, active, and contributing members of their communities, classrooms, and schools. As with all children, their engagement through belonging increases the collective value of each setting within which they participate. This one's my favorite. I say that every time I share this. Why do you think, like, what are some of the words that stand out in this one that you think are maybe unique or important? Equal, treated as equal. How many of us see that our students aren't given a chance to contribute to their classrooms or to participate in their school communities? You know, I think that getting a true sense of belonging comes from being valued, being needed, being part of something. And so many of our kids are sort of just served, you know, which is the danger in us saying we serve students. That's what we do. But I think that it's important. And even some of our students with maybe the most significant challenges aren't giving an opportunity to contribute to their classrooms. And how do we expect them to sort of be a part of our communities if we're not giving them those chances? Yeah, Karen said too many times they're not treated as equals, not given a voice and a choice. Yeah. Marty says as a blind adult, he derives great pleasure from serving in work, church, and community. I mean, we all want to contribute, right? I mean, I think that's how we become part of society and be included. So I hate to say that we needed this one written in there. It's the only one that really isn't tied to any kind of a law. We're just sort of said like, and by the way, kind of an addition here. So my summary of that was that my son deserves to be a kid first, and like all kids, adds value to our lives and the lives of others. So just to wrap us up at the end, and I won't read through this, but this is on the Bill of Rights document. It just says that it's a combination of legal rights, ethical rights, and human rights, but that it's not all inclusive. So is there anything you would add? Like after reading through these 10, is there something that you feel like if you were sharing this with families, you would say, and you know what I also think is important, and shared your own take? Is there anything that you feel like was missing? It's perfect. No, it's not perfect, but it's something. Cindy, were you going to say something?
I like exactly what you said, but what I like you said is that your child deserves to be a kid first. And I think that's important to note with all of this, because this is a lot of things, a lot of information for the family and a lot of stress at home, and that we have to remember that they are ultimately children, you know, for a long time, and that we have to include that in our thought process to try to make them into adults, right? So there's that lag time of 25 years, right?
My favorite thing that TVI ever said to me was that she told me when my son was like 2 years old, because everybody was throwing homework at me, you know, and she said that before, aside from everything else, you are mom first. That's it, you're mom. And so, like, I know that we have high expectations for families. In my home, I feel like I'm a horrible TBI. My husband is so much better at making sure my husband or my son actually like learns how to do things independently. I really took that mom thing to heart. So but I think it's important to give families the freedom to do that too, and to remember, like, yes, we're supporting them and we're pushing them to be independent, but also we're mom and we can have fun, and sometimes we can just snuggle and not worry about all the list of things that we have to get through before adulthood. All right, well, I think I've used up all my time, Adrian. I didn't end early.
You nailed it.
Emily and Adrian, this is Sarah. I just wanted to say that the timing of this with Adrian's workflow, workload conversation next week is perfectly timed, because I think that this Bill of Rights is an amazing tool to start conversations with families, with colleagues, with administrators. But at the be all end all of it is, in order to do all of these things that we all hope and wish to do at our highest level for our children, our students, it takes time, and finding ways to document that time in a way that administrators can see and understand, and then build a manageable workflow where the kids aren't the ones ultimately getting shortchanged in the process. I think that the timing of these two back to back is incredible, whether it was intended that way or not.
That's what you get when you get Texifornia working together.
Jeez. I wanted to add too that CSB did the Vietnamese and the Spanish versions. So those are both on AER's website too. So thanks to you guys for doing the translating.
Well, after we cure all next week, and after everyone learns a new workflow, that they can therefore guarantee the hiring of multiple new TVIs in their district. As long as you train them, send them through a university and find them, I'll help you convince your administrator. We do have next week. Next Tuesday is our last Tuesday tea of December. So join us same time, same place, 3:30, 4:30 next Tuesday. We're going to look at some workload analysis tools. But like this week, it's a conversation. And so there is no wonderful workload analysis tool. There are several out there, but there's not one that cracks the nut perfectly. So I'm hoping people will bring some of the things that you have used to the conversation. Emily, thank you. Truly appreciate you doing this. You were the right person for this. I think as it said in the chat, not only did you cover it for us, but you gave us personal anecdotes and gave us the perspective of being a mom, a teacher, and an administrator. And it is a wonderful addition to our community as a whole. And thank you for all the work you do in blindness.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.